Lorenzo Moretti's deep voice rumbled across the candlelit restaurant. "You look dangerous tonight," he murmured, eyes drinking in Isabella's daring red dress, the fabric clinging to every curve. She felt a shiver crawl down her spine at the intensity of his gaze. "I could say the same about you," she replied, trying to keep her composure. But the way he leaned closer across the table, the faint brush of his fingers against hers, made her heart race uncontrollably. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses, but to Isabella, it felt like they were in a world all their own. Lorenzo's presence was magnetic, his scent intoxicating, his commanding aura impossible to ignore. Every subtle touch sent sparks of heat through her. "Tell me you've been thinking about me," he whispered, the corner of his mouth lifting in a sly, dangerous smile. Isabella bit her lip, her pulse quickening. "Maybe I have," she admitted, her voice trembling just enough to make him lean even closer, inhaling the sweet hint of her perfume. Before the tension could ignite further, a soft, "Good evening, sir." "Ladies?" interrupted them. The waiter, tall, poised and professional, stood with a tray, but there was something familiar in the way she carried herself. Lorenzo's eyes briefly followed her, curiosity flickering, but he shook his head, dismissing the thought. "Table for two tonight special?" he asked, his voice smooth but tinged with distraction. Isabella noticed the subtle distraction, the way his gaze lingered for a heartbeat too long on the waiter. "Everything all right?" she asked, leaning closer, her hand brushing his under the table. He smiled, a predator's glint in his eyes. "Never better," he murmured, though his jaw tensed just slightly, betraying a flicker of something unspoken. The waiter approached once more, her eyes meeting Lorenzo's for the briefest instant. A spark passed between them, recognition, something buried, something electric. Isabella felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Desire? Jealousy? Something hotter, dangerous. And as Lorenzo's hand lightly grazed hers again, Isabella realized the night would be far more complicated, and far more thrilling, than she had imagined. The soft clink of cutlery and low murmur of diners faded as Isabella noticed the waitress approaching again. There was something striking about her, poised, confident, and breathtakingly familiar. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed for just a moment, and his lips tightened. That moment didn't escape Isabella. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her hand brushing his under the table. He smiled smoothly, hiding the flicker of shock. "Everything's fine," he murmured, though his voice carried a subtle edge. The waitress bent slightly to place the menu, and Isabella caught sight of a soft curve beneath the loose uniform. Pregnancy, unmistakable now that she looked closely. But it wasn't just the pregnancy that stole her breath. There was something magnetic in the way the woman moved, something Lorenzo recognized instantly. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. His past, unresolved, forbidden, and intensely passionate, had just walked into the room. The waitress finally met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped. Recognition flared in her eyes. Sofia. His ex-wife. The woman he had loved and lost, the one who still haunted his dreams. Sofia's lips curved into a polite, professional smile. "Evening, sir," she said softly, her voice like velvet, stirring memories Lorenzo thought he'd buried. Isabella's heart skipped, a mix of confusion and something hotter, jealousy tinged with curiosity. She noticed the way Lorenzo's hand twitched slightly toward the table edge, and how Sofia's gaze lingered just a second too long. "I'll start you with some wine?" Sofia asked, her tone innocent, but the heat in her eyes betrayed the undercurrent of emotion she couldn't suppress. Yes, thank you," Lorenzo replied, his voice low, almost growling. His fingers brushed Isabella's again under the table, but now, the touch carried a different kind of electricity, one tangled with memory and temptation. Sofia turned away, but the sway of her hips, the curve of her belly, the subtle scent that reminded Lorenzo of every forbidden night, they all lingered in the air. Isabella caught the tension, the almost imperceptible hunger in Lorenzo's stare. "Do you know her?" she asked softly, trying to mask the sudden flutter in her chest. Lorenzo's lips curved into a shadow of a smile, and he didn't answer right away. He simply let his gaze follow Sofia's retreating figure, and the air between the three of them thickened with desire, jealousy, and danger. The night had just begun, and the fire between them all was about to ignite. Dinner continued, but the air around Lorenzo, Isabella, and Sofia was charged with a quiet, simmering heat. Every time Sofia appeared, her eyes briefly met Lorenzo's, and for a split second, the world shrank to just the two of them. Isabella felt it too. The subtle brush of Lorenzo's hand against hers wasn't enough. His jaw tightened whenever Sofia came near, and the way his gaze lingered, it made Isabella's pulse quicken with a mix of excitement and jealousy. Sofia moved around the table with practiced grace, her movements fluid and provocative without her even trying. Her loose blouse hinted at the gentle swell of her belly, yet there was still the familiar curve of her hips Lorenzo remembered all too well. His mind waged a silent war. He wanted to touch her, to claim her, yet he sat across from Isabella, who looked at him with anticipation, her lips slightly parted. When Sofia leaned to pour wine into Lorenzo's glass, her hand brushed his. The contact was electric, sending a shiver up his spine. He swallowed hard, his pulse racing. Isabella noticed his reaction, and a flicker of possessiveness crossed her features. "Everything all right?" she whispered, pressing a fingertip lightly against the back of his hand. "Yes," Lorenzo replied, though his voice was rougher than intended. He avoided looking at Isabella, his eyes locked on Sofia's retreating figure. "Everything's fine." Sofia paused near the table as if sensing the intensity between them. Her lips curved in a subtle, teasing smile, part apology, part provocation. A flicker of desire passed through her eyes and Lorenzo's throat went dry. Isabella couldn't help but notice the electricity in the room, the tension curling around her like a living thing. She leaned slightly closer to Lorenzo, whispering, "You seem distracted tonight." He gave a half-smile, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Maybe I just have complicated memories," he murmured, and the words were charged, layered with unsaid passion. Sofia disappeared into the kitchen, but the lingering heat remained. The way Lorenzo's gaze followed her, the way his fingers itched to reach out, it was impossible to ignore. Isabella pressed closer to him, her body radiating warmth and desire, while Lorenzo's mind spun with forbidden memories. Tonight nothing was simple. Desire, jealousy, and danger coiled around them, promising that the fire between all three would only grow hotter. The evening wore on, the restaurant dimming as candles flickered across the table. Lorenzo tried to focus on Isabella, tracing her curves with eyes that burned with desire, but every glance toward the kitchen made his pulse thud faster. Then it happened. Sofia returned with a tray, and as she bent slightly to place it on the table, a small, familiar object slipped from her apron. A delicate bracelet with Lorenzo's initials, one he had given her years ago. Time seemed to freeze. Lorenzo's fingers brushed the bracelet and electricity shot up his arm. His breath hitched and Isabella noticed the subtle change, the quickening of his pulse, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly. "Everything all right?" Isabella asked, voice low, curious. She leaned closer under the table, brushing her leg against his. The touch was intimate, teasing, but Lorenzo barely registered it. Lorenzo's eyes met Sofia's across the table. She held his gaze for just a moment, the corners of her lips twitching in a sly, knowing smile. The memories came flooding back, stolen nights in hidden rooms, touches that had burned hotter than any flame, whispered promises in the dark. Sofia's body still held the same subtle curves, the sway of her hips that had once driven him wild. Even with the pregnancy softening some edges, she radiated a magnetic sensuality. Isabella's hand rested on Lorenzo's thigh now, pressing lightly, and he felt the heat there, a different kind of longing, fresh and thrilling. He wanted Isabella, desperately, but the bracelet in his hand was a burning reminder of forbidden passion. Sofia straightened, her eyes glinting with challenge, daring him to act on old desires. Lorenzo's pulse raced, mind torn between Isabella's innocence and Sofia's raw, seductive power. "Are you distracted?" Isabella murmured again, her voice velvet against his ear. The scent of her perfume wrapped around him, grounding him, but only partially. Lorenzo swallowed hard, clenching the bracelet in his fist. Desire, guilt, and anticipation swirled through him like a storm. He leaned closer to Isabella, whispering, "Maybe, memories can be dangerous." Sofia's retreating figure lingered in his vision, every step a tease, a reminder of what he'd lost, and what he might never fully escape. Tonight, desire was a weapon. And Lorenzo was caught between temptation, passion, and the simmering heat of jealousy. The clatter of dishes faded into the background as Lorenzo's gaze stayed fixed on Sofia. She moved with effortless grace, her presence a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Every sway of her hips, every subtle curve beneath her uniform teased memories that made his body ache. Isabella, sitting close, noticed his distraction. Her hand brushed his under the table, a touch meant to claim him, to remind him she was there, but it was futile. Lorenzo's eyes flickered toward Sofia again, lingering on the curve of her belly and the soft swell of her chest. Desire mixed with jealousy, and the tension between them crackled like electricity. Then the inevitable happened. Sofia, carrying a tray, bent too low, and a folded napkin slipped from her apron. Lorenzo's sharp eyes caught it before anyone else. When he reached to pick it up, a small engraved pendant fell from inside, a charm he had given Sofia years ago, intimate and personal. Time stopped. Lorenzo's fingers brushed against hers as he held the pendant, the memory of their nights together flooding back. His hands tracing her body, their mouths claiming each other, the heat that had consumed them both. Isabella watched, confusion and desire warring in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, curiosity tinged with suspicion. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Just a memory," he murmured, voice low, rough with unspent passion. Sofia's eyes met his across the table. She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a slow, teasing smile, letting him know she remembered every moment too. The heat between them was palpable, thick enough to taste, and Isabella felt it radiating from him, igniting her own desire. She leaned closer, whispering, "You seem distracted tonight." Her breath brushed his ear, warm and tantalizing. Lorenzo swallowed hard, trying to focus on the present, but the image of Sofia, the way her fingers had brushed his, the memory of her body pressed against his, it was overpowering. Sofia moved away, but the tension remained, lingering in the space between them like an unspoken promise. Lorenzo's grip on Isabella's hand tightened under the table, possessive yet conflicted. Desire, jealousy, and forbidden longing coiled inside him, promising that tonight, nothing would be simple, and everything could ignite with the smallest touch. The kitchen was dimly lit, the hum of appliances a quiet backdrop to the tension that filled the air. Lorenzo stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Sofia looked up from arranging plates, her eyes meeting his, a mix of defiance and something far more dangerous, desire. "Lorenzo," she murmured, voice low, almost teasing. "You shouldn't have followed me in here." He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, the heat radiating from his body nearly knocking her off balance. "I needed answers," he growled, his voice rough, deep with longing. His hand brushed against hers, lingering far too long, sending shivers through both of them. Sofia's breath hitched. "Answers? Or excuses?" she countered, tilting her head, her lips catching the dim light. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Every memory of her, the way her body had pressed against his in stolen nights, the soft moans that had haunted his dreams, flooded back. He wanted her. All of her. And yet Isabella waited at the table, blissfully unaware. "I want both," he admitted, his voice low and raw. His fingers traced the line of her wrist, up her arm, grazing the sensitive skin there. Sofia shivered under his touch, though she tried to remain composed. Sofia leaned slightly into him, the curve of her belly pressing just enough to make him inhale sharply. "Some things are dangerous," she whispered, her lips dangerously close to his ear. The scent of her perfume, soft yet intoxicating, wrapped around him, igniting every nerve ending. Lorenzo groaned softly, pressing a hand against her lower back, pulling her closer, though still careful not to cross lines they both knew could burn. Desire crackled between them, magnetic and unavoidable. Sofia's eyes flicked down to his mouth, then back to his eyes, daring him. "You remember everything, don't you?" she breathed. He swallowed hard, his lips barely brushing hers. "I do," he admitted, the heat in his gaze scorching. "And I want you." Sofia's pulse quickened, a flush rising to her cheeks. The forbidden thrill of desire, impossible yet undeniable, swirled between them. Their bodies ached with tension, every inch close enough to ignite, yet restrained by circumstance. And in the distance, the faint clink of silverware reminded them, the fire between them had to stay hidden, for now. Back at the table, Isabella tried to focus on Lorenzo, to enjoy the evening as they had planned. But the subtle shifts in his demeanor were impossible to ignore. The way his eyes followed Sofia, the faint tension in his jaw, the quickening of his breath whenever the waitress passed, it all set Isabella's pulse racing. She reached for his hand under the table, pressing it against her thigh, her fingers curling around his. "Lorenzo, you seem distracted," she murmured, her voice low and teasing. He swallowed hard, caught between 2 worlds, the alluring danger of Sofia and the intoxicating warmth of Isabella. Maybe I'm thinking too much," he admitted, voice rough. His thumb traced her palm in a possessive, lingering caress, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering toward Sofia once again. Isabella noticed, and a fire sparked inside her, part jealousy, part arousal. The idea that another woman, even an ex, could affect him this way ignited a desire she hadn't expected. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear. Do you want me here, or are you thinking about her? Lorenzo's breath hitched. Isabella's boldness was intoxicating, but Sofia's presence lingered in his mind like a ghost. I want you, he whispered, yet the words felt heavy with unsaid truths, the pull of temptation too strong to dismiss. Meanwhile, Sofia approached with their next course, her movements slow, deliberate, and sensual. The sway of her hips, the soft curve of her belly, and the way her fingers brushed the table drew Lorenzo's gaze despite his best efforts. Isabella noticed the subtle tension, the silent, unspoken electricity between Lorenzo and Sofia. Her hand tightened around his under the table, her own desire mixing with jealousy. If she's going to distract you, she murmured, then maybe I need to remind you, who's here. Lorenzo's body reacted instantly, his pulse racing, a low groan trapped in his throat. He leaned closer, brushing his lips along Isabella's neck just enough to make her shiver, claiming her attention without answering the question. Sofia retreated with a teasing smile, unaware that her mere presence had set the table ablaze with desire, jealousy, and unspoken longing. The tension was unbearable. 3 hearts, 3 desires, 1 charged room, and no one could ignore it. Tonight, passion was a dangerous game and everyone was playing. The restaurant had quieted, the low hum of conversation fading as Lorenzo's mind raced. Isabella pressed close to him, her warmth and scent pulling him back, yet his thoughts refused to leave Sofia. Then she appeared again carrying the dessert tray, her movements deliberate, slow, teasing. Her eyes met his across the table, soft yet daring, and in that moment, Lorenzo felt the old pull, desire wrapped in forbidden memories. Lorenzo, Sofia's voice was barely above a whisper but it carried weight. He looked up sharply. There's something I need to tell you. Isabella noticed the change immediately, his jaw tightening, eyes locking on Sofia's. What is it? She asked, curiosity and unease swirling inside her. Sofia took a step closer, and the curve of her belly brushed lightly against the tray she held, impossible to ignore. I'm pregnant, she confessed softly, the words heavy, charged yet intimate. Lorenzo's breath caught. Desire, shock, and something primal swirled in his chest. His hand brushed Isabella's thigh under the table, lingering, yet every muscle in his body screamed for Sofia. Isabella's eyes widened, a mixture of jealousy, confusion, and something darker, excitement maybe. She pressed herself closer to Lorenzo, her lips brushing his ear. And, is it yours? She asked, voice trembling but daring. Lorenzo's pulse raced. It could be, he admitted, his voice low, rough with tension. His hand twitched as if it wanted to reach Sofia, to claim her, to feel the life she carried. Desire and responsibility collided inside him, each stronger than the last. Sofia's gaze lingered on him, a mixture of longing and challenge. I didn't tell you before. I needed to survive. But now I can't hide it, she whispered. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table, near Lorenzo's, the contact electric even without touching him. Isabella, sensing the tension, pressed closer, her body radiating warmth, need, and possessiveness. Lorenzo's hands itched to hold both women, but reality and desire tangled him in knots. For a moment, silence stretched, thick with longing, jealousy, and erotic charge. 3 hearts, 3 desires, 1 truth, and the fire between them promised a storm that no one could resist. Tonight, nothing would be simple. Desire, temptation, and secrets were about to explode. Lorenzo sat at the table, his body taut with desire and tension. Isabella pressed against him subtly, her warmth, scent, and subtle touches igniting him, but his mind couldn't stop flickering toward Sofia. Sofia moved gracefully through the restaurant, her belly soft beneath the uniform, her curves still impossible to ignore. Every glance she shot Lorenzo made his chest tighten, a low ache spreading through him. Desire clawed at him, fierce and unrelenting. Isabella's hand slid along his thigh under the table, a teasing, intimate claim. Lorenzo, you're mine tonight, she whispered, breath hot against his ear. The possessiveness, the erotic charge, made him groan softly, yet it also stirred the forbidden fire of Sofia's presence in his mind. Sofia approached with the final course, carrying plates as if they were an extension of her body, her movements slow and seductive. Lorenzo's gaze followed the sway of her hips, the gentle swell of her belly, and the memories of nights filled with raw passion. Isabella's fingers tightened around his hand, pressing harder, brushing against him in a deliberate, arousing tease. If she wants you, she'll have to fight for it, she murmured, a dangerous gleam in her eye. Lorenzo's throat went dry. He leaned closer to Isabella, kissing her neck briefly, possessive yet conflicted, tasting her and feeling her heat. But even in the kiss, he imagined Sofia beneath his hands, the touch of her soft skin, the way she had moved against him in secret. Sofia paused near the table, eyes flicking toward him, daring him with a glance. The room seemed to shrink, tension so thick it was almost touchable. Desire, jealousy, and temptation swirled into an irresistible storm. Lorenzo's pulse raced. He had to choose, or at least decide how to navigate this dangerous game. One touch, one look could ignite a fire that would consume everything. Isabella's whispered claims against his ear made him ache, while Sofia's silent allure promised a forbidden, intoxicating pleasure he couldn't resist. The night hung between them, charged with erotic tension and unspoken longing. Every glance, every brush of skin, every subtle breath could tip the balance. Lorenzo realized one truth: passion, temptation, and desire were dangerous weapons tonight. And he was dangerously, helplessly caught in them. The restaurant had emptied, leaving only flickering candlelight and the heady mix of desire, jealousy, and unspoken longing. Lorenzo rose from the table, his body tight with need, mind still torn between Isabella and Sofia. Isabella followed, her hand sliding along his arm, heat radiating from her touch. "Tonight, you're mine," she whispered, pressing against him, lips grazing his ear. The possessive claim sent a shiver down his spine, igniting a desperate, aching need. Sofia appeared one last time, carrying the check but moving slowly, deliberately, her eyes locking on his. The curve of her belly, the familiar sway of her hips, and the fire in her gaze reminded Lorenzo of nights he would never forget, nights he had loved her too fiercely to let go completely. His hands itched to reach both women at once, to claim, taste, and hold them, but reality demanded a choice, at least for now. He leaned toward Sofia first, letting his hand brush hers, the contact electric, intimate, and impossible to ignore. Desire surged through him, raw and undeniable. "You're still impossible," he murmured low and rough. Sofia's lips curved in a soft, teasing smile, her eyes glowing with the same challenge that had captivated him for years. Isabella pressed closer, her lips brushing his again, claiming him in the way only she could. "Then prove it," she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of his chest, igniting fire where he hadn't thought possible. For a heartbeat, Lorenzo's world narrowed to two women, two desires, and one impossible choice. Every nerve, every muscle, every suppressed memory demanded release. Passion, temptation, and longing collided, a storm that could not be contained. Finally, he exhaled, leaning slightly between them, acknowledging the desire, the connection, and the tension that had brought them here. "Tonight, we feel it all," he murmured, voice low, throaty, full of promise. Sofia's eyes softened with the hint of surrender, Isabella's fingers dug into him possessively, and Lorenzo felt the heat of both women radiating toward him, electric and overwhelming. The night ended not with a resolution but with promise. Promise of passion, confrontation, and the fire that would continue burning between them. Desire had won, boundaries had blurred, and in that delicious, erotic chaos, Lorenzo realized one thing. Love, lust, and temptation were weapons, and he was willing to wield them all.